very pleasant good morning, dear guests, friends, and book lovers who are watching this program being streamed live from the comforts of your home and office. Thank you for having me over. My name is Vijay, and I come from Crimson Earth Publishing. This morning, I would like to share with you about Tamil publishing in Singapore. Now, before I proceed any further, I would like to thank the Singapore Book Publishers Association for taking this effort to organize this event under such difficult situation. Thank you. Now, let me share with you what we have planned to share with our viewers this morning. First, we will look at a brief history of Tamil publishing in Singapore. Then we will look at some of the social trends that has shaped the way our writers write and our readers' appetite for reading. We will then zoom into the reader's profile to understand what are their needs and wants before moving over to looking at some of the authors and the kind of works they have produced. Then I will touch a little bit on the kind of publishing grants available to the publishers and authors in Singapore. I would then sample some of the books that we have published under these grants. And finally, I will summarize this talk with some of the notable projects that we have done over the course of the last few years. Now, to whom will this talk benefit? We have prepared information that I believe will be helpful for aspiring writers, publishers, and primarily to our students, parents, and teachers who are looking at a reading resource, as well as distributors and bookstores who are keen in selling Tamil books. Now, a little bit about Crimson Earth. We were established in 2001. My wife, Ms. Prema, and myself started this company. We started off focusing on publishing and distribution. We also started including custom publishing for authors who wanted to have their books published in Singapore. Our primary focus has always been children literature. And we have been part of the Buy Singlit committee since its inauguration. Now, to understand the kind of books we produce, it's relevant to share with you the experience that we have harnessed over the last couple of decades. We started our journey as a MOE-registered private school, offering maths tuition to kids in neighborhood schools. We saw the challenges and came up with a model to address each of these issues in this private school. Armed with the experience and knowledge, we eventually developed a parenting portal called Absolutely Parents. During the building of this portal, we had the privilege of working with many medical, clinical practitioners as well as therapists. And that included ONG, the pediatricians, neonatals, specialists. We also had the privilege of working with speech therapists, occupational therapists. And to add on, we had the benefit of specialists dealing with special needs like ADD, ADHD, dyslexia. So the focus of Absolutely Parents was towards children's well-being. With this information, we then morphed into eduguide.sg. This became a more specific portal offering content on children development with regards to education, ECA, CCA, exams, and career development. Now, a little bit about myself. I started my journey as a defense engineer, defense science, MINDEF. Then I took a break and started working as a relief teacher in St. Margaret Secondary School, where I spent 4 years teaching both E and A maths. After that, we started a private school, offering the same subjects. Then I became a content development, working with the various hospitals, schools, in developing Absolutely Parents. After that, at eduguide.sg, I was focusing on sales and marketing, and I've carried the same task to Crimson Earth. So my primary job is to focus on sales and marketing of books to schools and libraries. Now, Tamil publishing in Singapore has a very long and colorful history. We have findings to suggest that the Tamils' interest in this part of the region dates back 2,000 years. And a couple of years ago, Straits Times carried an article of an artifact that was discovered at the mouth of the Singapore River. It had the inscription Kesari Varma, which in long stands for Para Kesari Varma, which is a title used to address the Chola kings of the yesteryears. This artifact dates 1,000 years old. In 2018, Mr. S.A. Nathan, a publisher himself, published a book on prominent Tamils in Singapore, where a chapter was dedicated to publishers. In this chapter, we realized that our Tamil Muslim brothers were the first to start the vernacular Tamil press in Singapore, and that was in 1850. From then till now, we have had close to 44 Tamil publishing houses that have blossomed as well as withered over the course of time. What's last standing is the Tamil Murasu, which happens to be the national Tamil daily. Now, it is interesting to note that Tamils consider writing a book an essential component of their life. This has been captured as an important paragraph in the book published by Mr. Gopinath Pillai and Ambassador Kesava Bani, 50 Years of Indian Community in Singapore. So I think this particular desire in them has seen a healthy volume of Tamil books being published by local authors in Singapore, as well as local works being published in Singapore. Now, I say it's a healthy figure simply because, unlike India, we can't have authors who are full-time writers. So they actually work for a full-time job and pursue this hobby of writing as part-time. So despite the challenges, they have published many works, and notable works as well. Now, for us to understand our readers, it's important to look at the broad policies and reforms that have shaped Singapore over the couple of decades. So in the 60s to 80s, we had communal living. A lot of neighbors looking after one another. Most mothers were working at home, housewives. So they were there to look after the children. Then from the 70s to 80s, we saw a shift. It was the birth of the productivity movement. Mothers started going to work. We had double income families. In the 90s, the Ministry of Labour, which is now called the Ministry of Manpower, introduced what we call the foreign domestic workforce. This is to help families cope with their domestic chores. From 1990 to 2010, we saw a major shift in the industry. From a productivity-oriented industry, we became a service-oriented industry. And what does that mean? It means quite a number of operations shifted to China, and quite a number of our staffs were retrained to become service-oriented staffs. There was also the arrival of new citizens. 2010 to present day, we have the rise in internet usage. Internet connectivity and accessibility is one of the highest in the world. And we have seen the blueprint of Smart Nation being introduced. In 2016, the National Arts Council did a nationwide survey, and the findings are as follows. Most Singaporeans are practical readers. They read books for a purpose of acquiring knowledge. So these focus tend to be like textbooks or self-help books. They are not particularly interested in literary works. And the reasons they have cited is lack of interest and lack of time. So why must I share this information? As a publisher, we need to understand our clients, our readers, in order to create a book that will appeal to them. Some further details that helps us understand our readers. The demographics are as follows. Today we have what we call double income families. Close to 70% are double income, which means both parents work. And let us look at one of the key statistics, mother's background. As you can see, about 60% mothers work outside home. That has temporarily shifted in the last 2 years because of work from home due to COVID. So the remaining 30% comprises of mothers who work at home or stay at home. The exposure to smart devices, as you can see, is hovering around 90%. Most students carry a smartphone. They have access to a learning device like an iPad or a laptop. And the usage has been constantly increasing. Now thanks to home-based learning as well. So once again, you may wonder, why must we be aware of these statistics? Because when you have access to online digital content, which is far more engaging, the need or the desire to look at print becomes lesser. After looking at all these demographics, we have identified our readers as two groups. We have kids who learn Tamil or their mother tongue as first language. We have kids who learn Tamil as a second language. There's a big divide between such children. Kids who learned Tamil as a first language probably started listening to the language while they were in the fetus stage. They grew up listening to Tamil. So it was like throwing the fish into a water. Whereas kids who took Tamil as a second language grew up listening to maybe English. So to them, Tamil was another language which they had to learn in school. So there's once again a huge divide in the way they learn and think and process information. So this data that I'm about to present comes from a collective source of tutors, teachers from schools, preschools, junior colleges over the last 5-6 years. Kids who come from English-speaking background are not conversant in spoken Tamil. And due to the rise of digital content, teachers share that these kids display an attention deficit. So it can be anything from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, and they struggle to keep up. The stimulus from video exceeds that of reading. On video, you have visuals, you have volume, you have sound, you have touch screen that makes that experience a lot more engaging compared to reading. Parents have cited limited control due to their work nature. The increased internet usage as a result of the inadvertent introduction of e-books and home-based learning. So the direction towards school is that they want more e-books. And in a typical classroom, you have kids of mixed ability, from highly conversant to kids who struggle to speak one word of Tamil. So this presents a new scenario for the teachers. So bearing all these factors in mind, we have to ensure that our books address some of these dire issues. And this is how we have designed the books. Very simple sentence structures, so that in a single glance, they can capture the essence of the title, the story. Less is more. So we use less words and more images. A picture speaks 1,000 words. And more importantly, most of the stories are in local context. We have kids going to the zoo. We have children celebrating National Day. We have families going out to have satay. So these are the kind of stories that we bring into these books so that the kids can see themselves in it. And of course, behind every story is an underlying value that we want to inculcate. They must grow up to become compassionate, kind, helpful to the fellow human being and animals. Of late, we have also introduced current affairs, and primarily on COVID, how kids can actually help out during this endemic, how kids at secondary school, junior colleges have volunteered to distribute masks or food for families served with a home quarantine. And every of these book also opens up some discussion topics that the teachers can have in the class. Now let us look at the authors who have stepped forward to address some of these challenges. So we have, number one, Miss Annalakshmi. She's a teacher, a relief teacher in a secondary school. She has produced 2 or 3 books, and her books are quite popular. She has created what we call Midnight Children in Tamil, with a bit of horror, a bit of terror and fear. Such books augur well among teenage students. And then at number 2, we have Miss Alaganila. She has created what we call a very cherubic character called Melissa. And this Melissa, during her free time, has imagined a merlion. It's a figment of an imagination, merlion. So these 2 characters travel through Singapore at various adventures. So books such as these, once again, tend to reach out to the kids well. Then we have Miss Eunice, former librarian who's working with Civica. She writes for younger readers. Miss Jansi Rani was formerly from MOE, from curriculum planning. Her stories are all heartland-based. And one of the more popular books is about Rocky and Ramu. It's about how a boy adopts a pet, and he and his pet have a lot of exciting adventures in the house and outside the house at the playground. At number 6 is Miss Malarvili. She's a senior librarian. Now she has written a book called Lulu and Sundali, which is presented here. What's most gratifying to note is that this book has sold more than 5,000 copies, which I think for us is a record. This is to show that if books are written in a manner that appeals to children, there are parents and schools who are willing to patronize such books. It's an interesting story. It's about how 2 arch enemies, a cat and a mouse, well, actually a mouse is being chased by a cat, and they end up in a library, and they start reading about one another, and they realize that they can actually become friends, and they coexist as friends. And they go on to become ambassadors of reading, and they cultivate the habit of reading to all the kids out there. So this book is quite popular in that sense. At number 10, we have Mr. Sithuraj Ponraj. He's one of the most accomplished authors we have worked with. He has got a very diverse range of writing skills. He writes for adults as well as young children. He has written 2 chapter books on what we call a mystery. And these mysteries are based on numbers, which is quite intriguing for upper primary as well as lower secondary school kids. At 11, we have Miss or Dr. Umayal. She has just finished her thesis. She writes plays for kids. And plays are an interesting learning tool in classroom because the teachers can get the students to dramatize the play. When the child acts out, the child feels more involved. So we hope to see more works from these aspiring authors. Now we move on to young adult authors. Now there seems to be a stark contrast. This is for children's book. It's predominantly ladies. This is for adult books. And it's more male-driven. So I believe the maternal instincts are very strong with the ladies, which is why they are maybe more apt at creating baby books and children books. So here we have some highly renowned and notable authors in the Singapore landscape. At number 2, we have J.M. Sali. He is a Cultural Medallion recipient and a Sea Right Award recipient. He hails from India. One of his essays he wrote as a student received what we call the Singapore Literature Prize equivalent in India. And we published that work during the SG50 event. And then we have Singapore's own Keating, Mr. Katumu Iqbal. He's the most accomplished poet in Singapore. He too has received the Cultural Medallion, and we have published his 13 works, which I will share with you later. At number 4 is Mr. Ma Ilanganan, another Cultural Medallion recipient. Now, what's interesting about this gentleman's work is that he presents his work like a photojournalist. Reading his work makes you feel that you're actually there. So he's written a book called Vaigarai Pukal. And that book is also here at a display. This is being used as a H2 literature text in Singapore. Then at number 6 is Mr. Rama Kannabiran. He is Singapore's first Singapore Literature Prize winning recipient. He has received the Cultural Medallion as well. He has produced, I think, of the 13, he has published 6 books, and they're on display here as well. At 7, we have Mr. Pon Sundar Rasa, a retired teacher who's also a lecturer in NIE. Now, this gentleman has presented many stories which are based on Singapore's 70s landscape, on how the blue-collar workers, the indentured workers, actually carved out a living in Singapore. This gives us an idea of how our parents, our grandparents' lives were back then. So it creates a sense of reality for us to understand how privileged we are today. At 8 is Mr. Perumal Krishnan, who goes by the pen name Pudumai Dasan. This gentleman was the senior executive producer at MediaCorp. He has published a total of 22 books, and some of his books are the first of its kind in the world. He has translated 6 of Shakespeare's work into Tamil. And that is quite a mammoth task, because it has to capture the essence of that context without losing its value. So I think his works has been very well received, not just in Singapore, but in India as well. And finally, we have Dr. Sivakumaran, the former head of the language department at NIE. He has translated his PhD thesis from Tamil to English, which allows other scholars and researchers to look into Tamil children's literature in depth. Now, for the many of you out there who are curious or aspiring to publish your work as an author or as a self-publisher, this would be considered a wonderful time, because we have a national framework of grants available to all of you out there. So I'll give a brief overview of what are these grants. So if you consider yourself as a literary writer, you're writing a work of fiction, One of the organizations you can touch base with would be the National Arts Council. They have what we call the presentation and a participation grant that allows you to present your work and have it published such that your idea becomes or reaches the fruition of a printed work. You may be required to work with a publisher in getting your books published. The NAC also has a capability development grant that allows you to develop your skills as a writer, where you will be paired with a more accomplished author as a mentor. Following the National Arts Council, we have the National Heritage Board, the sister arm of NAC. Now, if you have an idea of presenting a work that is related to Singapore culture, Singapore tradition, or values related to Singapore lifestyle, then this would be the right organization to reach out to. They have a couple of grants, and I've showcased 3 of them. The minor project grant for a single book, the major project if you're producing a series of books, and then if you're keen on doing research related to Singapore history, you have the Heritage Research Grant. So all this information can be found on their website. What makes NHB different from NAC is that at NHB, the author can submit his script. And the board will eventually find a publisher to help you publish your work. The few other establishments which are also in the grant structure includes the Singapore Book Council. Every once in 2 years, they produce what we call the Beyond Words program, where authors can present their work, and qualifying works can get published. Now we look at works that falls outside the auspice of these organizations. We have the Tamil Language Learning and Promotion Committee, the TLLPC, that also welcomes quality works worthy of print. And finally, of course, we have the highly acclaimed Lee Kuan Yew Bilingual Fund. If you are an author, and if you can form a team with a language consultant and a publisher, you can pitch an idea that looks at pedagogy, learning needs, and children literature to this establishment, and they'll be quite keen to welcome you on board. Now that I've touched base on the types of grants available, I present some of the books that we consider successful. Now, before presenting these books, I will share with you what, as publishers, we have in our mind. We want children to enjoy reading. We want children to continue reading. And we want them to cultivate reading as a life skill forever. So for that, we need to remove all the daunting elements, like difficult words or many words. So we focus on what we call first few words. In English, we have the Peter and Jane series, the 200 common words. So likewise, in every language, there are 200 common words which we can introduce from an infant stage. So in any reading endeavor, we want to start with step 1, introduction to common words, be it nouns, verbs, just introduce them, just by speaking to them again and again. And then get them to read out loud, make sure they pronounce, so that they don't feel uncomfortable or mocked at. And later, when they reach this stage, we guide them to the next level, which is to read independently on their own, quietly sitting down, just browsing through. And after that, we look at the other essential skill sets like enhancing vocabulary and then reading longer sentences. So this is the chart that we are following in all our books. And before I show you the visuals, this is the cardinal rule that we have in our company. We emphasize on 2 important values, which is one must learn to hear before speaking, because at the fetus stage, we are listening to the sounds. We can't see, but we can listen. So the hearing capability is very well developed. So we get them to listen first before they speak. And then we get them to read before they write. Writing, from what we have gathered, can be introduced much later. So this is the simple workflow we follow. Getting kids to speak as a chore is the easiest up to 2 years. Getting them to read would be done from 2 to 5 years. Writing can be introduced anytime from 6 years onwards, and spelling can start at 7 years. So we share this information with parents to emphasize the importance, not to reverse the order. This is an organic or a healthy way of getting them to love reading. And bearing these principles in mind, which we have acquired as teachers, or running a private school, or parenting portal, we have come up with what we call the Graded Reader Series. This is to help them with the literacy part. The literary part will come later. So we have common nouns, common verbs, prepositions, and we have a picture dictionary. Like if a child goes to a market, what are the kind of things she will see? The 20 common words like stall, fruit, stall, market, groceries, stuff like that. Just introduce the 20 common words that you see at a place that you visit frequently. Once they have acquired mastery over these 200 common words, be it nouns or verbs or preposition, we can start telling them stories. So we pick the more common popular themes like animals. Cute, cuddly animals with large eyes and a smile are always a sure win formula. And then we have prepositions can be introduced through a simple story. Here, there, back, forth, up, down. It's a simple story where a father lovingly buys a watch for a daughter. The daughter brings the watch back. Next day morning, she wakes up. The watch is missing. She's searching for the watch in the whole house. So she's looking front and back, up and down. So this is another way of teaching them without making it obvious. Then some of the stories have to be gender specific. Boys seem to gravitate towards robots, sci-fi, animation. So we have books catering to all sorts of genres. So this is about a father who's a computer scientist who develops a mini robot, and that boy befriends a robot, and they have some exciting adventures at Amokyo Park. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Lulu and Sundali, the story about the mouse and the rat. This is being translated in Malay as well. We as a publisher, we evolve largely through the response of our readers. When our parents come back to us and say, look, they like our books, or they find the books helpful, and they give us ideas, we take them seriously. So of late, we have started producing what we call the board books. The board books are for even younger readers. Like 3 months old, you can pass the board book because it will not soil. It's made harder and a longer shelf life. And once again, these board books are all fiction, simple stories about child learning to drink, walking, drawing on the wall, and it's basically celebrating raising children. Right? In particularly this story, we have a child who refuses to bathe. I can attest for that because I know my kids have this problem. So we have to cajole them, coax them, bribe them to get them to bathe. So these stories go well. And as we move on to the older readers and we see that they have slowly developing an appetite for reading, we try to introduce a bit more experiments. So the first 2 books, if I can share with you, are translated works. They were very popular in the English medium from the publishers we worked with. So we took them and we had them translated to Tamil, Justice Pa. And this is the Nightingale. So these books are also doing very well in terms of sale, because the marketing has been done by the English titles. The same applies to this David Xiao's series. His books and the illustrations are wonderful. They are quite magical. It's like a fantasy-filled theme, every page. So to see that in Tamil is quite exciting for the kids. So if you were to ask whether translation books are a big yes, I agree with you. After children's picture book, the child will eventually evolve to become a chapter book reader. So what kind of stories to introduce? I think this is tried and tested. Anything to do with puzzles, mystery, adventures are a big yes. So the first one is a very interesting story in the sense that we have a student who's a prefect. She realizes that an emblem in a school goes missing. Together with her 4 friends who are prefects, they go on a search to discover or to recover this emblem. So they go to Pasir Panjang Wet Market, they go to the Singapore Museum. So the whole story revolves around the Singapore landscape. So it's quite exciting in that sense. And this is by Situraj Ponraj. This book is also doing very well. It's about a boy who develops a deep respect and admiration for his teacher. The teacher goes to Indonesia one day to attend to his sick mother, and he does not return. So the boys start missing him, and they start searching for him. And they realize that there's a puzzle that they have to solve in order to save the teacher. So titles such as these or content such as these tend to resonate well with kids. And now for the young adults, we have books which come from the Cultural Medallion series. This was a very famous radio play broadcasted in the 80s based on a real story about how an undergrad was kidnapped. So listeners then were enthralled to the radio, listening to this play every week. So this was been converted into a book now. Valva is a chronicle about a teacher who's trying to teach kids to become better in their language and the struggle she goes through and how she eventually wins them over. Vaigai Pukal I shared with you, Flowers of Dawn. And Macbeth is Mr. Pudume Dasan's translation work. Books that have been published through grants. We have the Stacy series by Armour Publishing. They did a wonderful job. They have captured 5 major museums through these cartoon-like books. And the drawings are vivid. It's almost as if you're inside the museum. So we have bought the rights and have them translated into Tamil. So that was done with the NAC's help. This book, Lime Rice, by Mr. Pon Sundarasu, was also supported by the National Arts Council. This is by the Lee Kuan Yew Bilingual Fund, and this is by TLLPC, done by a group of enthusiastic students from the SMU. It's the first Tamil graphic comic. So among the projects that we have undertaken, I would count this as number 1. In 2015, I believe, when we celebrated SG50, we were commissioned to work on some of the Singapore's most popular books. And after doing research with some of the organization, we identified these 5 authors and we published them. At this point in time, these books weren't available in the library. So it's like a renaissance, the re-emergence of quality books coming back. This project came through largely through the support of TLLPC. They were quite moved to hear the extent to which the author has gone to write these works. Now, this gentleman is, Mr. Krishnan, is 90 years old, and he works almost 8 to 10 hours a day, even now. So he has painstakingly translated all the major works of Shakespeare into Tamil. What was gratifying about this project was that as a publisher, we did not have to struggle with the sales because they placed firm orders for all the secondary schools and junior college libraries, which took a big relief for us. This is the collection of books that we are printing under the LKYFB. This is the first half. We are working on the second half now. Mr. Khatu Mu Iqbal's collection, from children right up to young adults. A collection of 13 books comprising close to 700 poems. So for the viewers out there, if you're keen to know more about the books, you can collect the catalogs from the website. For book sales, we have a online shopping site called vidya.sg. It's going through upgrading at the moment. For inquiries, you may always write into sales or admin@crimsonearth.com. And you can also contact me at the numbers given here. So I've come to the end of the presentation. Thank you.